Story 1. Gallbladder attack. Had 4 to 5 of them before they realized they needed to remove mine. They would come out of nowhere, and I would be doubled over in pain to the point I could barely walk. Ended up in the emergency room every time until they admitted me and removed it. According to the surgeon, she said it was the worst condition she had ever seen a gallbladder. Story 2. I tore a contact lens and scratched a good portion of my cornea when I was a junior in high school. Any light at all sent me into a spiral of pain. My dad was convinced it was allergies, so he had me take 4 Benadryl. I still didn't sleep. When he finally took me to the doctor the next day, they put dye in my eye to see if it was scratched. Half of my eye turned orange. I wore an eye patch for a week. I've had double knee surgery, broken bones, scratched my eye, had a brick wall fall on me, and many other injuries. But nothing compares to that terrible feeling. I was absolutely screaming all night long. Story 3. Dislocated my hip by busting it through the front of my pelvis, destroying part of my pelvis, and tearing my hamstring 60% through, all in one swift motion. Story 4. I had an infected tooth a couple of years ago, and I needed it extracted as a matter of urgency. So I went to the dental hospital and was given 2 options. Either I could be prescribed some antibiotics to bring the inflammation down before the extraction, which would delay the extraction by a week, or they could give me some anesthetic and perform the extraction immediately. I chose the latter. After I received a dose of anesthetic, they started their work. I raised my hand as I could still feel what they were doing. Long story short, they gave me an extra 2 doses because I could still feel it. After the 3rd dose, however, I was informed that if I raised my hand for them to stop again, they would have to stop completely, as they couldn't give me any more anesthetic. I didn't raise my hand, but I needed more anesthetic. I felt absolutely everything. It was excruciatingly torturous. The pain I felt. It was so painful my eyes were streaming tears. Well, lo and behold, they successfully extracted the infected tooth. But the dentist said to me afterwards, "You felt everything, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah." And he replied, "That was seriously brave. Not a lot of people would have done that." I said, "It needed to be done. I couldn't take any more time off work, so I powered through it." As I was leaving, I overheard his assistant say to the dentist that I was a crazy person. I wholeheartedly do not recommend doing this, though. Story 5. Tailbone nerve pain. Coughed one morning, bent over, and felt lightning in my tailbone. I couldn't stand up straight for 2 days, and since then, it happens every few months. Story 6. Pinched nerve in my neck, running down my back, through my shoulder, down to the elbow to my fingertips. So fun. Found it on my first day of vacation just 2 weeks ago. Spent the entire trip in bed just crying. Here I am on week 3, with hardly any relief and still a mess. I don't wish this on anyone. Story 7. When I woke up from a kidney transplant surgery with 0 pain medication or epidural since the intravenous line in my jugular had kinked, it took them 9 minutes before the doctor ran in and quickly gave me a large dose of fentanyl and put me on a drip with a button for fentanyl. Mind you, I was 15. Story 8. When I was 32, I was diagnosed with stage 3 advanced, aggressive cancer. I underwent 3 major 6-hour surgeries, battled a severe wound infection, and endured chemotherapy and radiation. At the time, I thought nothing could be more painful until my intestines stopped moving. I was hospitalized for 3 months. For 39 days, I wasn't allowed to eat or drink anything orally. Instead, I survived on a feeding line, a nasogastric tube, and 3 intravenous sites delivering various medications. To manage the pain and keep me sedated, I was given 3 milligrams of hydromorphone every 2 hours, injected directly into shoulder butterfly sites. For context, the maximum dosage is typically 2 to 4 milligrams every 4 to 6 hours. Even when I was unconscious, they continued administering the hydromorphone. It was relentless. Story 9. Testicular torsion during a roller coaster ride. Worst minutes of my life. The hospital was right nearby, came straight in, and the doctor fixed it in one go. The pain, however, is hellish. For every man as a comparison, as if someone were kicking you between the crown jewels with a running start, again and again. Story 10. Tooth infection. The pain was worse than any broken bone or dislocation I have had. I could not eat or sleep. I ended up having 3 root canals shortly after discovering the infection. Story 11. The time I ran down into a drainage ditch and hit my knee full force on a piece of reinforcing bar hiding in the grass. Easily my most vivid childhood memory. I still get phantom pains in my knee whenever I see reinforcing bar anywhere. Story 12. I suffer from cluster headaches. I cannot describe how painful they are. It starts off like someone pinching down on the back of your neck and then boring into the back of your head and squeezing the back of your eyeball with a pair of white-hot vice grips. Sometimes I'll blow a blood vessel in my eye or throw up from the pain. 1 star. Would not recommend. Story 13. I have double inflammatory bowel disease, liver disease, kidney problems, quite a few encounters with sepsis. I've been strangled and beaten so many times. I've had things broken and dislocated, particularly my back and knee. I still practice contortion and backbend chest stands, ironically. I have 17 teeth left from malnutrition and malabsorption issues. One by one they got infected, went through extractions while infected, got even more infected post-extractions. Dry socket pain was to be expected and it lasted for weeks. I had an infection post-extractions that took 3 months and 7 different antibiotics to kill. I could go on, but childbirth, holy shit. Childbirth takes the cake. Nothing compares. Story 14. I remember once I tried to run and jump up a set of concrete steps. I had to run close to full speed and jump as high as I could to be able to clear the full set. I usually was able to do it, but this one time I messed up the landing and ended up smacking my knee into the corner of the concrete step. The pain only lasted about 3 or 4 minutes before starting to subside, but it was painful. Story 15. Getting my packing and dressings changed daily for 2 weeks after having an infected cyst removed. The first few changes brought tears to my eyes as the site was still fresh and tender. Story 16. My first thought was getting my wisdom teeth removed because it happened last week. Then I remembered I gave birth a couple of years ago, and that tops off whatever else. Story 17. Fistula. I have some in my colorectal tract. I have a hole in my backside that goes out of the right of my buttock. Yes, I got ripped a new one, and it is the most painful thing ever, not to mention the indirect pain of having to deal with everything that comes with it. Yes, I've been hit in the testicles. I've also had bones broken. That's pretty painful, to be honest. Story 18. Trying to get up and walk with a broken leg and ankle immediately after jumping off a 30-foot tall tunnel. I wasn't really walking since my leg was like a worm. I crawled to the sidewalk because I was in the middle of the expressway at 2 a.m. Surprisingly, no cars came because it was the entrance of the expressway. Story 19. Think it's a slipped rib. Happens often. Doctors will not do anything for me, but it feels like a spear going through my chest. Agonizing pain in the front and back of the body. Story 20. I was bullied a lot in school. A kid almost shattered my collarbone. It had a lot of fractures but kind of still held together. I was partially paralyzed for a while due to severe pain. That was while I was on painkillers. Story 21. A couple of times when I have taken a bath as an adult, the curve of my back has created a vacuum seal on the bottom of the tub. When I got up, it felt like my skin was being ripped off. Story 22. I know medically there are the top 3 unbearable pains: kidney stone, pain and cancer, and toothache, which people definitely must have covered in the comments. For me, it has to be a jellyfish sting on my upper left thigh. Only it wasn't my upper thigh that hurt, but my left testicle. Anything seemed to trigger it, and it hurt like a continuous wasp sting, and I have had a few of those. Cried for hours. Wouldn't wish it on anyone. Story 23. I was in Nashville for a bachelorette party and slipped and fell on some stairs. No, I wasn't drunk. We were literally leaving dinner to go out to the bars. I had 1 glass of wine. I ruptured a disc between my 5th lumbar and 1st sacral vertebrae. I didn't feel the pain right after the fall. I'm not sure why, maybe because I was in a bit of shock and the adrenaline kept me from feeling it, or maybe because I was distracted by the immediate and massive bruise that was forming on my thigh where I had landed on the edge of a stair. That lasted weeks and left a dent in my leg still visible to this day. I didn't feel the pain until the next morning when I got out of bed and stood up. I immediately fell to my hands and knees, screaming in pain and unable to move. It felt like someone had punched their way through my back and was crushing my spine with a red-hot fist. I literally stayed there on my hands and knees crying for a couple of hours until the medication and muscle relaxer my friends happened to have on them kicked in, and I could move enough to get around slowly. My right leg had also gone completely numb except for the really fun times when it felt like I had fire running down my leg, which was sciatic pain. I somehow powered through the whole weekend, thanks to booze and medication. Got a lot of free drinks thanks to my giant brews and bachelor parties feeling bad for me. We also got a 5-hour-long golf cart tour of Nashville, including a private tour of a recording studio at Big Machine, thanks to the tour guide feeling bad for poor crippled me. Got home and got a magnetic resonance imaging scan and realized how badly I'd actually hurt myself when the neurosurgeon, who had told me in my first appointment he would be conservative in his treatment because I wasn't even 30 yet and he didn't usually do surgery on people as young as me, walked in with my results in hand and said, "Yeah, we're scheduling surgery. I don't know how you don't have foot drop or cauda equina." I had surgery less than a month after I fell. Thankfully, it was very successful. I re-injured it a few years later on the left side, but luckily it was not as bad, and I was able to get spinal injections and avoid surgery that time. I don't wish that pain on anyone. It was completely debilitating. The initial pain was horrific. I physically could not stop myself from collapsing to the floor or screaming. I have a pretty high pain tolerance. I fell asleep during a 5-hour tattoo on my ribs. I broke my wrist during a softball game and not only continued to play, I walked around with it broken for a month before I finally said, "Hey, this still hurts like hell. Maybe I should get it looked at." But that back pain literally brought me to my knees. Story 24. Salmonella poisoning. For reference, I was wounded in Afghanistan in 2009, which resulted in an amputated leg, a shattered spine, and complete evisceration. I sat in the dirt with my guts in my lap waiting to die, and that didn't hurt nearly as badly as whatever was going on inside my belly after eating some recalled Parmesan cheese. Story 25. My friend and I once chose to swing on the swings at a park, and foolishly we decided to face each other as we swung towards each other, sitting sideways on the swings. Our feet would swing towards each other, and during one swing my friend's feet booted me right in the sensitive area. It was so painful that I ended up walking as if I had injured myself. Story 26. When they tried to put an intravenous line in my wrist artery, I had no problem with my elbow as I have easy veins. But my wrists are small. They tried 9 times before giving up since it wasn't medically necessary. Both my wrists felt like they used them as a dartboard. Story 27. Cluster headaches. It's like a migraine on steroids. They are literally called suicide headaches for a very good reason. And when you get them, you get a lot of them for a long time usually. They make life a living hell. Luckily, I found a treatment to help with them. I don't get them as much anymore. Still get regular migraines though, but it's better than the cluster headaches. Story 28. Childbirth. Specifically, those 10 minutes before the baby crowned. Holy Mother, ring of fire in places there shall not ever be allowed such things. Story 29. Ruptured spleen as a teenager. 8 days in the hospital to let it heal on its own. 2 to 3 days of excruciating pain with any kind of movement. Jello or broth soup for 4 days. 25 years later, I still cannot eat Jello. Story 30. The most recent one was a really bad sunburn. It's called Hell's Itch. I couldn't even sleep, and my body had to twitch every other second to shake out that pain. It lasted for 2 days. Dreadful 2 days. Story 31. I've broken a collarbone, had a gallbladder attack, kidney stones, and those were nothing compared to ulnar nerve entrapment at the cubital tunnel, also known as the funny bone. Both of them. Story 32. I got a tattoo right above my private area of a snake, and the snake's head went down to a part of my shaft. This pain actually made me think, why am I doing this to myself right now? I have dealt with a great deal of pain throughout my life. I've been hit by a car. I had a couple of calluses on my feet that I had to remove myself, which was so painful. I tore a tendon while working out, but nothing compares to that tattoo. Story 33. Broke a molar. I don't think it's as painful as some of the others mentioned since I was able to finish my work shift without crying. But the moment it happened made me understand how pain can be so bad you need to throw up. For comparison, I broke my big toe once and that also sucked, but I didn't get the vomit reaction. Story 34. Having a foot run over by the heavy side of a forklift. It still hurts 20 years later. Imagine the spaces between your toes squishing open like ripe fruit. Story 35. Pulmonary embolism. I have a very high pain tolerance, but this was so bad that I couldn't even lie down. Just lying down for my computed tomography scan took a good 7 minutes. Story 36. When I was 12, I got into a fight with a bigger boy, and he smashed a paving stone on the back of my head. The emergency room had no anesthesia, so they had to stitch me without it. However, the painful part was when they used pliers to separate the skin from the skull to stitch it more tightly. My pain tolerance skyrocketed ever since, so at least I gained something in return. Story 37. Gallstones felt like my abdomen was going to burst open. I started lying on the bathroom floor whenever I felt an attack starting in case I needed to vomit or otherwise. Just sweating and desperately trying to find a position that was less painful. I was lucky that my attacks usually lasted only 30 to 60 minutes. I could actually feel when the stone had moved, as the pain would fade in seconds. I got my gallbladder out as an elective a few months ago. The surgeon said it was in bad shape, and it was a matter of time before I would have needed emergency surgery. The attacks were getting more frequent, and I started having chronic inflammation along with the acute attacks. I cannot overstate how wonderful it is to not have to deal with that anymore. No more having to lie down with a heat pack after meals. No more wondering if this was the attack that would put me in the hospital. The only problem is that I can't have pork fat anymore. Any other fat is fine, but even a little pork fat will send me running to the toilet. It's a price I'm happy to pay.